It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future.
How's it going?
It's cold. And not only do I mean the weather, but the relations between Ukraine and Russia have not gotten really any better.
Yeah, totally. And the U.S. and Russia.
Yeah, it just seems like it's a never-ending war, which just makes me always think about the throwbacks to the actual World War II and what it probably felt like at the various points to the various countries involved.
Well, when you're essentially in World War III, it would make sense that there's a lot of parallels to World War II.
Then even the parallels to Vietnam, because it wasn't considered a war. It was a police action, at least by the U.S., for a decade.
That's how most our wars are fought these days. War has to be declared by Congress, and that's just not something that people typically want to be on the record doing. You remember the Iraq War.
Iraq police action.
Yeah. I think they actually voted in Congress for it, but...
Fair. We've got some Ukraine war expansion rhetoric. It looks like Latvia is saying that Ukraine should be free to hit the military targets in Russia.
So basically take the war to Russia's homeland.
It's so crazy because all of this basically started only because Russia literally invaded Ukraine to take back the land that they claim was already theirs, and now Ukraine's going on the aggressive.
Millions of people have been displaced from Ukraine. They've essentially cleared out a battlefield. You see the pictures of the people that are still there, huddled in basements, without electricity, blackouts. Right. I think most of central Kiev, or a lot of it, is either without electricity or basically near to without it. The suburbs, which were harder hit earlier in the war, now are less hit because they haven't been flooded with those missile strikes recently. I think the mayor of Kiev was encouraging people, if they know people in the suburbs, to go out there and make it out where they actually have electricity. We're entering a really interesting time in the war because the whole country is covered with snow. Right. And it's an entirely different battlefield than it was before. In oil and gas up in Canada, they deal with this too. There's these periods between the freeze and the thaw, at least in Canada, where they can't bring their equipment up there because it will just basically get stuck. And the same thing with Ukraine. Like early in the war, because it happened, January, February, March last year, a lot of the Russian invading troops were dealing with that, getting stuck and then getting obliterated. I think the next couple of months are kind of the calm before the storm. And you have not a lot of ability to fight. Mm-hmm. It has, I think, the tendency to kind of ramp up the rhetoric. And people are really all in now. Ukraine's talking about reconstruction funds of up to $1 trillion. And it's just, I mean, this is wild, right? So the battlefield has been cleared. It'll be interesting whether or not essentially the Axis and ally powers kind of, like we had before, flood into the country and duke it out in 2023. One of the things I sent you I found is really interesting is the U.S. is ramping up their training in military forces. So they'll be taking basically up to 3,000 Ukraine troops, taking them over to German bases per month, training them, and then sending them back to Ukraine. So, we're drastically ramping up our direct involvement in the war. Mm-hmm. We weren't giving them the good stuff, but we were essentially giving them weapons that we had already and are reinvesting the money on a transaction basis to replace that, both us and European military. So even though you're not seeing a big ramp up in the government balance sheet right now, we're drastically improving our military firepower right now by moving out the old inventory.
Coming on just under a year of this at least being announced, internationally and stuff. And I got the pleasure of joining the podcast about a month after it started. So it's hard to believe that we're still talking about this 9 months later. And some of our biggest fears are coming true because we're talking about some shipping supply chain issues 6 months ago and stuff. But this is basically going to probably make it even rougher, and some of the other subjects we talk about. So even if you don't care about the Ukraine-Russian part of the war, this is going to continue to affect every facet of our society here in the U.S.
We're going through a 3 decades long transition period for the entire world. And it's in every facet of society, power is being restructured. And then you have the internet, the developments of that layered on top of it. What's that term that you say? It rings true to history.
This is that, then is now.
In the financial markets, technology has affected finance, and there's these larger swings, higher variability and stuff like that. And I feel like that's society now too. We're kind of like an old rubber band where it's about to break. It's losing its flexibility. That's our society right now. December is going to be a huge month. The whole UK experience, having a head of state come in and lasting 44 days or whatever it was. Lebanon right now is on their 4th round of trying to find a president. But you look at pretty much every country of the world, there's either this real flashpoint in power or someone like Xi that's really trying to double down and consolidate power right now. The world's an interesting place.
If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.